I think you all are probably familiar with the Tor project, but let's start out. I guess maybe we'll go into what is the origin story of the Tor project. How did it come about?
Yeah. So hi everybody. Is my microphone working? Sounds like yes. Great. So I'm Roger Dingledine. I started Tor long ago. I wrote the program called Tor, helped to create the nonprofit, and have had a lot of different hats over the years. The original version, the way that Tor came about, I was working on an anonymous publishing design that's not too different than the Filecoin thing that I was chatting with Kurt about earlier for my thesis back in 2000, and I ended up going to a conference, a privacy research conference, where I was presenting the basically anonymous data haven design that I was working on, and I met the onion routing researchers from the US Naval Research Lab, and I ended up getting a contract from them to help them write research papers. And so there was no code involved, there was no Tor didn't exist yet. But in my world, part of what you're doing when you're writing research papers is you build it to actually see if you're right. So I built Tor as part of the process of writing those research papers, and that's how the original world came to be. So yes, the Naval Research Lab still has researchers who are working on it. It's great that they're doing that, but the actual code for Tor did not come from the government, it came from me.
All right, very good. But I mean, let's talk about that a little bit. So I mean, well, actually, first of all, I say, where did you go right after the working with the naval people? Was it?
Oh yes. So we had some funding from DARPA, like the U.S. military, to do the research papers, and that lasted for a year or two. And then, as all government funding happens, it lasts for a little bit, and then it disappears. And then we had no funding for a little while, and then the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF.org, decided that we were so important that they needed us to continue existing. At the time, I think it was the file sharing stuff. It was the Napsters of the world, and they were worried that there was going to be a lawsuit that prevented people from having programs on the internet that could move files around. And we were a good use case for actually people do need privacy to do good things in the world, and you can't make that illegal because you would also make Tor illegal, was the plan they were going to use in their legal defense.
Yeah, and that is how I first met Roger. So I was at EFF at the time. So you wrote the code, and I trust you. I know you. I've known you for a very long time. But how does someone who doesn't know you trust this? How do you build trust in a system by the design?
Yeah, so that's a broad topic, it's a good match for the cypherpunk world that we're talking about today. One answer is the Tor network is based on relays run by many thousands of volunteers around the world. So the actual operation of the network, your Tor client pulls down a list of all the relays and then builds a path through 3 of them. And as long as those relays aren't collaborating, and it's a bit more complicated than that, but as long as things don't all get together to collude against you, then nobody gets to learn that this user went to that destination. So in that sense, it isn't about me. I'm not the one helping you browse the web over Tor. It's a network of many thousands of decentralized volunteers. But that said, there is code, and I wrote it originally, but now there are more people who work on it. So part of the answer for that is we need transparency, not just it's free software and open source, of course it is, not just here are the design documents, here are the research papers, of course we should publish that, but also as a community, hi, I'm Roger, I will identify myself and happy to chat with you afterwards about any Tor things. And that community building is a key part to how the trust works. You can't just write software and give yourself a pseudonym and stick it on the internet and then have a trustworthy global network. There are decades of community building that are needed.
All right. And so in its design, one of the things we've talked about is the challenges if you have a privacy protective technology that is only used by a small set of people, whether it's the government using it to hide their identities to go around, or maybe it's the criminals who are using it, or maybe it is privacy advocates which are using it, which all you privacy advocates should be. But what do you need to like fill out that protection?
Yeah, so diversity of types of users is really important for Tor. First of all, for the privacy security arguments you were just talking about, if we had a privacy network that's only for cancer survivors, then the fact that you've downloaded Tor and you're using it tells people too much about you. So we need Egyptian activists and Swiss law enforcement and so on, all blending together into the same network so that you've got your privacy. So that's a very short version of a really complicated topic where, yes, bad people end up using privacy on the internet also, and we maybe should talk in a bit about how you handle the PR on that, but I'll let you steer.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the challenges is that sometimes, bad people are early adopters of some privacy technology. And privacy is very important for everyone to have. But if it gets in the policy world, some people point to this and say, and that's why we shouldn't have privacy because bad people might use this. Or even point to it as, here, we identified a bad person who has used this, and so therefore this is a bad technology. But yet we need this technology to have a free and open society. So how do you work on the PR with that when talking to policymakers?
Yeah, so part of the answer is you need to have a whole lot of users, and you need to have a whole lot of good, ordinary users. And part of the challenge that we have, if you're law enforcement and you hate the world and you hate the internet, and you learn about this Tor thing and some bad person used it, you figure it's privacy, it's stupid, nobody wants it. There are 6 users, one of them was bad, get rid of this thing. But the reality is that we have something like 8 million daily users, and almost all of them are ordinary people who are trying to get to Facebook without getting spied on, or they're in Iran and Iran blocked Facebook, so they're trying to just get to their cute cat pictures or whatever people do on the internet. So that ordinariness...
Mostly cats.
Pardon?
Mostly cats.
Mostly cats. So that ordinariness is really important for Tor's sustainability, for the fact that we continue to exist. So that's one part of it, but another part of it is you need to build allies among your adversaries. You need to go find the FBI people who understand Tor and teach them why it's important and help them start using it also. So I was telling somebody a story earlier about, I have a friend who used to go to DEF CON and ShmooCon and so on, and then he joined the FBI. And he's a hacker dude who works for the FBI, but he really understands Tor. And he was telling me a story about being in a room with the Department of Justice one day, many years ago now, where some lawyer said, you know what we should do today? We should make a law outlawing Tor today. That's what the US government needs. And he stood up and said, I work for the FBI. Are you trying to make my job impossible? I need this tool. And the fact that he was in that room that day to say that is maybe why they didn't try to work on that law that time. So build allies among the people who start off hating or fearing your project is a really important piece for sustainability, but also super challenging.
I just I guess add some anecdotes to that. One of the things I was doing back at the EFF would be sometimes a exit node would get some inquiries from law enforcement, and it was very useful to have people in law enforcement who I knew and could say, look, could you explain it to your colleagues what an exit node is and why this is not the droids you're looking for, and it was very handy to have someone inside the system who could explain what it was rather than someone outside trying to explain it.
And being the sort of person who can have a civil conversation with a cop doesn't come naturally to our community. So this is a skill that you have to learn to try to figure out how to communicate to them in a way that's going to reach them.
So sometimes, there also had the accusation that this is just helping law enforcement or governments, or it's helping people in power gain it. But you have a counter argument, as we've discussed.
Yeah, so one of the most important topics to talk about in the Tor world, which is actually a great fit for this week, is how the power structures work. So you might look at the Tor network, the Tor use, and say, well, this is helping good people and it's helping bad people. It's a two-edged sword. You can define good and bad as governments or criminals or whatever your good and bad are. But the reality is the people with a lot of power already, the ones who have militaries and law enforcement and so on, they've got a lot of other options. They're already, they have many choices for how to stay private. Whereas the people who are vulnerable and don't have the power, whether that's because they're LGBTQ in Uganda or all sorts of other examples of vulnerable populations around the world, those are the people who benefit even more from Tor. So as you're thinking through, is it worthwhile to society or not, you start off saying, well, here's a good argument for, here's an argument against. But I think the important thing is that it's most useful for the people who need it most, and not so necessary for, like, if you have a military already, you're doing fine, use your intelligence agency's privacy tool. But if you don't have other options, then Tor is most useful for you.
Right. And accessible, right? That because people can download it to start using it, and there you go.
Yeah, and it has to stay free and freely available to everyone. Imagine you're in Burma and you want to have some privacy on the internet. Maybe in your cryptocurrency utopian future, they just grab some Ethereum and pay that way, but they don't have resources to buy coins to spend them on this. So we want to actually make sure that it's especially available, actually free for the people in the world who need it the most.
And I love that you do that, making it free and available, and you're not nonprofit and so on. But there's also, you know, we need to have Tor be around forever, right? A sustainable model. So can you talk a little bit about how Tor keeps sustainable?
Yeah, so this whole how do you fund it or how do you keep it going thing is an important topic to talk about for all of these projects, but especially like large networks of volunteers that hopefully have a nonprofit behind them. The Tor funding model up until recently was actually pretty similar to the professor funding model. Like, I used to write research papers. I would get National Science Foundation grants to understand anonymity more, and we would use those to write more Tor. Then we got some funding from the US State Department and the Foreign Ministry of Sweden to teach people around the world how to be safer. But a lot of that, it's basically a combination in our world between the researcher, professor, get grants to write new research, and the traditional nonprofit, get government funding to continue having these tools exist. And that's an exciting balance to have these days, where something like half of our funding is still coming from governments. And you might look at that and say, well, wait a minute, doesn't the NSA hate this? Surely there's somebody in the NSA who hates it, but there are also people in the NSA who use Tor and rely on Tor. But our funding doesn't come from that piece. I don't want to be dealing with the intelligence side of things. Our funding comes from the Foreign Ministry that wants to help other groups around the world be able to speak and read and learn freely what's going on the internet.
Well, another source of funding, right, is that people donate to Tor. People like you could go to the torproject.org and help with the cause.
And we're actually doing a fundraising end-of-year campaign right now. So I don't want to turn this into a fundraising pitch, but we are a nonprofit, and we're in the middle of I think the donations get matched up to a pretty large amount by some very nice major donors.
Excellent. So one of the things also comes up a lot in this community is adding an incentive layer, and you have some thoughts on putting that into the Tor system.
Yeah, so the Tor network right now is made from volunteers who, the fundamental building block is altruism. The fundamental building block is people who have spare resources and they set up a relay, they learn about somebody in Egypt or Washington, D.C. or Thailand who need privacy, and they decide, I'm going to participate in that, I'm going to do that. And that altruism is great because the participants that we have are the right kinds of participants. They're doing it for the right reasons. On the other hand, we only have something like 8,000 relays around the world, and periodically we wonder, how do we get, like, imagine if we could do some sort of incentive coin thing that would get more people excited. So there are a couple of problems with that seem pretty hard to balance with the altruism, community, organic growth. One of the big ones is, so we start with this altruism building block. Imagine you instead start with the capitalism building block. The goal is I'm going to maximize my revenue from this. So in that case, my first step would be minimizing my costs. I will go to the same cheapest ISP that everybody else goes to, and I'll run my relay there so that I don't have to spend any more money than I possibly have to. But then, if I'm in this in order to make money, why shouldn't I sell user data on the side? Like, the goal of capitalism is to maximize the profit. So the incentive structure, the reason why people are wanting to participate is something that we need to think through really carefully. And I guess the broader topic there is when you're building privacy decentralized tools, think through the power structures that you're trying to enable or disable. And I think it was actually Harry from NIM who framed it this way originally many years ago. You have to think about the power structures, because if you don't think about the power structures, you're going to end up accidentally reinforcing the existing power structures. You're going to end up putting the centralization back in the people who currently have the power without even realizing that that's what you're doing. So all of these tools are inherently political, and you have to think through what impact you're having on society by the incentives and other structure choices that you make.
Well, and some of the things about Tor is it can be challenging to existing power structures, and have you faced some of these challenges? Some countries that you might not go to as a result.
Yep. Well, there are. It's tough to know which countries actually care about these things. There are some countries like China that I probably shouldn't go to, and it would probably be fine. I was in Taiwan meeting with a bunch of people who were working against the Great Firewall in China, and the party game at breakfast one day was, what do you think happens if Roger goes to China? And the consensus answer was 95% chance you're totally fine, 5% chance you disappear. And it wouldn't be because they would target me in particular. It's because Trump would arrest some Huawei VP that week, and they would make a list of people they could retaliate against that nobody would really miss that much. And I would be on the list.
We'd miss you a lot.
Well, yep. So, yeah, I probably shouldn't go to Russia. I probably shouldn't go to Iran. Probably shouldn't go to China. But for each of these cases, I'm waiting for regime change, and hopefully it won't take that long.
And also at the same time, there are some countries that have invited you in to talk about Tor, to find out more about it, right? And from the governments and from civil society.
Yeah, I actually got an invite from the Russian government to go to Moscow back in like 2017. And I asked my Russian friends, should I do this? And they said, because the government itself has invited you, yes, it'll be safe, you should do it. And this is the last year you can do it. My government is crumbling. And I didn't end up doing it for visa reasons, but regret.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything else that we talk about? Maybe take some questions from the audience?
Yeah.
I know we're behind on time. Do we have some time for questions and such?
I heard a thumb up.
All right. So yeah, is there any questions from the audience?
One.
Oh, yeah.
One. Yeah. First, then Harry.
All right. Super.
Thank you so much. Do you feel like Tor is still heading in the right direction since like many countries actually now are banning Tor? Actually, I'm from Syria, and during the war, the checkpoints used to check our laptops, and they would check if you have Tor downloaded, and then you're like screwed if you have it. And also, like, there's a lot of rumors that FBI is like monitoring exit nodes as well and using that data and to see, okay, what are suspicious activities happening there. So I feel like there's too much eyes on Tor now. Like, a lot of countries are banning it. Exit nodes are being monitored slowly but gradually. Do you see this keep going forever? Thank you.
Yeah, so these are broad topics. I think Tor in general is still the best solution that we have in the world for how to get privacy in a global way. It is the case that more and more countries are turning authoritarian and trying to block and control what happens on their internet. And it's not just Syria. Part of the challenge that comes to that, years ago, so you probably know the story about Syria and Blue Coat, but most people here probably don't know the story of Syria and Blue Coat. I'll spare you the whole story, but the summary is it's a California company that was building and operating the surveillance and censorship infrastructure in Syria. So this is it's not like Syria thought, what we're going to do today is crack down on the internet. They went to some sales conference where the Blue Coat people are like, yo, buy my thing, you can collect all the bloggers and stay a dictator. So they bought it and deployed it. And that is that tendency of California corporations and Italian corporations and Israeli corporations of building these arms and selling them as mini arms dealers around the world is a growing problem for everybody. It's not a Tor-specific thing, but it's something that we as free society who care about this need to figure out how to fight back against. So you asked about, is Tor heading the right direction in terms of countries trying to crack down on it? I think we're doing pretty well on that. It's certainly the case that some countries try to stop you from reaching the Tor network, but that Russia, Iran, Syria, China, I'm almost done with the list. So it's not like half of the world is doing that. And then to very briefly try to answer your exit relay, who's watching them question, a lot of people wonder, well, wait a minute, I heard that the Tor network is mostly run by the NSA, or I heard, or there were a bunch of rumors going around. We actually know a lot of the people who run the Tor relays because one of the community phenomena that has grown is there are a bunch of nonprofits around the world who run Tor exit relays in their country. There's one in the Netherlands, there's one in Sweden, there's a new one in Italy that's just popping up, there's one in France, there are several in the US, there's one in Canada, and these are nonprofits that collect donations from their local hacker group or something like that in order to run large exit relays and maintain this distributed trust property. So we know a lot of the people who are running the relays, and they're not the NSA. That's the good news. The bad news is we're a network on the internet, and the internet is more centralized than it should be, and large governments have been working hard for the past 10 years to get better and better at watching the whole internet. So the open research question for us and you is, how do we build a tool that can handle all of this centralization that's happening on the internet? Like, there are not enough undersea cables under the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. There are not enough Cloudflares. There are not enough Akamais and Amazons and so on. All of this centralization threatens, like, okay, you want to use Tor, great, but you're using Tor to talk to Cloudflare every time because Cloudflare hosts 40% of the web these days. So that re-centralization means that if somebody's watching Cloudflare, there's only so much we as a privacy tool can do. So complicated topic. I've been rambling for a while. We'll hit another question. Ask me more afterwards.
So Harry from NIM. So I remember quite a few years ago, Roger, I said, hey, we were at some Tor meetup, and I said, hey, why doesn't Tor get some of this cryptocurrency funding? And I do hope that everyone here, I use Tor, NIM is incentivized, Tor isn't, and that makes it even more important, I think, for people to donate to Tor, because it is a valuable public good. The amount of sheer capital, inefficient capital waste I see in cryptocurrency is ridiculous. And if 1% of that money went to Tor, Tor would be amazing.
Yes,
well
please do support us.
But my question is this, which is, while I think you have perfectly valid reasons for not doing Tor, the ICO, it is unfortunately other people did it for you, if I remember correctly. Ator, now calling themselves Anyone, and then every year or two or even every few months I see yet another scammy thing actually using the Tor name often. Trying to raise money. And I remember talking to Ator guys, I was like, yo, are you shipping this money to Tor? Not really. So can you explain a bit, how do you deal with this? The fact that people are raising money off your good work, trying to quote unquote incentivize Tor relays, but then nothing goes back to you, which is crazy. What do you do in that situation? I think you got a bunch of relays jumping on.
Yeah, so that's also a broad and complicated topic. It's definitely the case that folks who are passing around large amounts of money and freeloading off of the Tor ecosystem should be helping instead to sustain the Tor ecosystem. One of the other topics that your question reminded me of is more than half of the nodes in the Bitcoin network in the Bitcoin network are available as Tor Onion addresses. So the Bitcoin network relies on the Tor network for its continued connectivity. And that is an example of an infrastructure thing, going back to your sustainability question. That's an example of Tor as embedded infrastructure, as critical infrastructure, where it's not just Bitcoin, there are a bunch of tools that are building on top of Tor, and we need to continue existing so that all of these other projects can build on top of us. But you're right, there's a sustainability side of that. From an openness side, our code is free software, open source, you should use it for whatever. But from a community building, name recognition, trademark side, please don't name your thing confusingly like Tor. It's not going to end well. Nobody's going to have fun in that situation. If you want your thing to be Tor, talk to us, work with us. Make sure that you are prioritizing user safety rather than whatever other capitalist style incentives you come in with. So yeah, there are a lot of things to talk about in that area.
Let's have one more. Do we have a question?
Hey, it's Henry. So a question in a similar vein, actually, is if you look back to the origins of Tor, the original design for Tor is, I think, nearly 2 decades old. And at that time, we didn't have the same technology for doing economic coordination. Like blockchains just didn't even exist, weren't even thought of. In retrospect, this is sort of a weird counterfactual to try to ask, but if you were designing Tor today, or if 20 years ago we had the blockchains of today that we have, do you think the same arguments about whether or not Tor should have an economic model would come to the same conclusion? Or do you think that there is a possibility for new economic coordination technology to maybe alleviate some of the problems that would have prevented having a sort of economic model for routing built into Tor?
So the particular blockchain stuff that we have today did not exist back then, that's true. But there were, like Mojo Nation, which turned into Least Authority, which turned into Zcash, there were related projects like that. And part of the challenge that we, the Tor people, saw in each of these decentralized token exchange ideas, so the analysis of it, how do you know if it's going to go the way you hoped it would go? The analysis always ends with a sentence, and then it's just like an economy, which starts off great. You're like, wow, that'll like capture reality, but that just means that you're going to have all the terrible side effects that real economies have, where people show up trying to get the money and they take advantage of whatever protocol you've built and fork your blockchain or whatever the metaphor is for this year. So I think we did have those types of tools around at the time, and we explicitly tried to simplify so that we could understand where it would go. And we chose to build as an organic community that focused on people trusting each other rather than as a mathematical mechanism that hopefully you coded exactly right and you let it go and it goes in the right direction, because those sure don't seem like they're going to end up prioritizing the safety of users.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Roger. Round of
Thank you.
applause.